You're listening to Beat Autoimmune and Thrive, the podcast all about reversing and preventing autoimmune conditions so you can live your most vibrant life as soon as possible. We talk about autoimmune root causes, actionable solutions, and inspirational healing stories. I'm Palmer Kippola, and I used to have MS. Today, I'm an author, a speaker, a functional medicine certified health coach, a pickleball player, and nature lover who's helped thousands of people reclaim their health and their best lives. Let's dive into this episode. I am so happy to be joined today by Dr. Shani Robbins. Shani is a licensed psychologist and the founder of Wisdom Therapy, a therapeutic approach he pioneered in 1998. He's an instructor at Stanford University, Foothill College, College of San Mateo, many others, teaching courses in psychology, including positive psychology and wellness. Shani earned his bachelor's in psychology and philosophy from UCLA, his master's and PhD in cognitive psychology at the University of California at Santa Barbara, and his second PhD, I did not know this until this morning, in clinical psychology in the year 2000. He's been a California board licensed psychologist for more than 20 years. Now, Shani integrates best practices from Western psychological science, emotional intelligence and cognitive behavioral therapy, and Eastern traditions, including mindfulness, empathy, compassion, gratitude, and humility. Shani offers his psychotherapy services specializing in anxiety, anger management, and career counseling. He works with individuals, couples, and groups. His practice integrates techniques from cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness meditation, and wisdom therapy to help clients develop skills for reducing stress and enhancing their well-being. And I have known Shani for more than 20 years. And I've benefited from his wise therapy, as have many others. And I'm so happy to call him a friend. Welcome, Shani.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It occurs to me, 20 years, that passed fast. But it's
Where to
wonderful.
go?
It's been wonderful knowing you this long, and hope for many more years. And you've been an inspiration in my life as well. So thank you.
Oh, well, boy, I'm so excited about this conversation. And it's really not a moment too soon because I think a lot of people are distressed about a lot of things. And you know that I serve a large population of people with autoimmune disorders who are trying to heal. And that brings with it a lot of opportunities for practicing these different elements of wisdom therapy. So why don't we start with the big picture? How would you define wisdom when it comes to healing, particularly from something complex and potentially chronic, like an autoimmune disorder?
Yeah, thank you for that. Probably a good first step is to broaden our definition of healing to well-being in general. So we want to be more ambitious than just reducing pain or just reducing feeling ill. We want to pursue a much more ambitious agenda. So it's not just there's a field of positive psychology about 20 years ago has recognized that for about a century, psychology is focused primarily on stress, anxiety, anger, depression. And so about 20 years ago, there's been a movement towards what about strengths like mindfulness, emotional intelligence, gratitude, empathy, courage, wisdom. So instead of if you think of like the worst state we're in is minus 100 and total bliss is 100 plus 100, rather than going from like a minus 70 to minus 20, which clinical psychology and much of medicine has mostly been founded on the medical model, it's to go to plus 30 or plus 50 or plus 70, so to continue in our developmental path. So as we focus now on that, on embracing well-being, no matter where you are, that's the goal. We notice a few things. One of the first decisions we're noticing is that the recognition that wellness has these two components. It's both the reduction of anxiety, anger, conflict, the reduction of the suffering and the stuff that's not going well in our life, but also the increases in happiness, life satisfaction, positive career goals, meaning, positive relationships, exercise, good sleep. So there's reducing the negatives and increasing the positives. So wellness has both of those, and just doing one is not going to be enough. We want to do both.
I
So
love that.
kind of at a high level, just to get our agenda set here. Luckily, the skills and the practices that we have that we're promoting, that we're pointing out here, and the psychological science points out to, and integrative medicine points to, does both. It increases the positives, it reduces the negatives in terms of uh, stress, anxiety, things like that we'll talk more about. So as we're talking about that, we're talking about developing skills and so on. Notice how our maturity over many years has contributed to our development and how that has contributed to our well-being. So when we're younger, in our, let's say, in childhood, in our teens, we're highly reactive, we're emotionally reactive to many things, we catastrophize many things. It's everything is the end of the world when it happens. And then as we become older, late teens, early adults, mid-age, we start taking things in stride a little more. Why? In part, for many reasons we'll talk about, but in part because we're noticing that everything we're calling a problem somehow gets somewhat resolved, or more or less resolved, and then we move on. And even the stuff that doesn't get quite resolved, we learn how to live with it and we move on. And we just keep doing this over and over again in life. There's not too many of us in our 30s or 40s or 50s that are still um, experiencing a lot of angst about the tricycle we didn't get when we were 3 or 4 years old. We've moved on from that. And so we're noticing, or not getting picked on a baseball team in middle school or high school, or, I mean, some of us still carry around some of those grudges and things to some extent, but more or less our life has moved on from that. And so we're noticing that that piece, that maturity, developing wisdom, developing, moving, facilitating our growth, our maturity forward is a key step to well-being. So we're not here talking about just getting rid of a few symptoms. We're not talking about just getting by. We're talking about something very profound at the very foundational level of actively facilitating our growth and development much more rapidly than you would usually have. So that's our starting point.
Thank you for framing it that way. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm visualizing it as it's not just, health isn't just the absence of disease in the same vein, right? It is actually cultivating full vitality. It's an opportunity, it's an invitation, and it sounds to me like it starts with maybe a decision to take responsibility that this is how I want to live. I don't want to be on the victim side of things, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, on the positive side, yeah, mm, you don't see too many Shakespearean sonnets about love, where the sonnet is, "Oh, we don't yell at each other much anymore." That's not that inspiring. It's something much more than that, about comparing Juliet to the sun. It's something that's almost otherworldly. It's so inspiring, and what you just said is a big piece of that. That wisdom, uh, which I've been focused on as a kind of an organizing concept to all these skill sets, is placeholder for that. Is it's an, in short, when wanting to define some aspect of it, it's an advanced stage of development that's accompanied by skill sets that significantly contribute to our well-being and health and positive relationships. And so over the course of the next few minutes and over some of these points we're asking and trying to meet on is identifying some of the key dimensions of what that is and how we can practice it
Yeah.
in a practical way. And what you said is a big part of that. The notion of freedom of choice. Viktor Frankl, famously wrote Man's Search for Meaning. Um, Maybe nowadays it would be called, Person's Search for Meaning, or rather than Man's Search for Meaning. But he came out of the Holocaust, and he wrote this book and called it he pioneered the field of logotherapy, which is one of the first existential psychotherapies, and in part based in existential philosophy. And what what those tenets hold primarily is a couple of well-known things like freedom and responsibility. And so that becomes now the foundation. Once we've identified wellness and the ambition of pursuing wisdom in our development as an overarching goal, now we want to acknowledge that we have the freedom and choices of we have the freedom to make choices of what to think and how to think it and what to practice and decisions we're making and how to live and who to live with and where to live. And with those freedom of choices comes responsibility. Responsibility, you break down that word, right? The ability to respond ushers in responsibility. And so sometimes people don't like to feel the freedom that they actually have because they have a sense implicitly that, hey, if I acknowledge that, now I've got some responsibility to actually act on that. And who needs that aggravation? Sometimes if I know working out, walking, biking, going to a gym is healthy, every day I don't do something, whether it's a little bit of walking or something, I'm realizing I'm not doing something towards my health and well-being. And so it so the responsibility piece of it is non-trivial. But we can also bring some we can talk about later self-compassion and realism.
Yeah,
It's okay sometimes not to have our best days. It's human not to always be optimal in everything we do. And so there's a kindness and gentleness to the practice too, and that's also practicable.
that's right.
And so uh, it's the freedom of choice, even in things like really sad events, like one of the saddest events I can think of is a funeral, for example. Even there, we can celebrate the life of the person, not just mourn the loss. We always have choice of what to focus on, even in the worst of situations. And so, humor, for example, is something that I think is severely under applied. I think it could be brought into almost anything. There's a reason there's a category called dark humor because that's brought in during the difficult times and sad times. There's a reason sometimes when we make jokes about something, the next sentence is, too soon, meaning that, we have a sense that, yeah, there needs to be healing here, but that humor can also be healing. Um, there's, I saw a good T-shirt that's, I think you'd appreciate. It says, like sometimes being open and honest is difficult, but there's an advantage for folks knowing that one is grappling with their health. It actually creates an open door to be even more honest because you're constantly practicing having to be more honest with yourself. You can't afford to be as dishonest with yourself or others as much as we used to because we now have much more difficult things to grapple with. So they're pushing us to be more skillful. So the joke I saw this T-shirt once. It says, "I have MS. I don't have the energy to pretend I like you today." So it's a little harsh, but we don't like everyone, and sometimes we pretend we do, and it takes energy to do that, and it's a way of bringing humor to a challenging situation like MS.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm totally with you, Shani, on loving humor, and it's just one of my favorite things in the world. In fact, it's one of the ways during my first 6 weeks when I was diagnosed with MS, I lay on the couch for 6 weeks and there was nothing I could do because I was numb from the neck down. And one of the things my family and I turned to was watching funny things on TV. So we learned that laughter, and this was Norman Cousins' Anatomy of an Illness, wonderful book, still holds true today, that humor is actually, a healing balm. So really, you're spot on with that. Let's dive into some of, is still in the category of setting the stage here. Sometimes you talk about wise thinking or unwise thinking. Do you see common thought patterns that people display that might be unwise versus wise, and I think this could lead us into some of the distorted thinking that I know that you are expert in.
Yeah, as you have become. Uh,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, as your question suggests, there are how we think significantly influences how we feel. And that alone, just to pause on that sentence for a few seconds, which means if we want to feel differently, we shift our thinking. And once we start acknowledging that, the field of cognitive behavioral therapy, and pioneered by Aaron Beck, and rational emotive behavioral therapy, pioneered by Albert Ellis in the 1950s and 60s. So this has been around for over half a century. And it's one of the leading practices in modern psychological therapy science. Um, Identifies a host of so-called cognitive distortions, that's ways of thinking that significantly contribute to feelings like stress, anxiety, anger, uh, and conflicts in relationships and work. And as we know, stress and anger are among the two leading causes of disease in this country. They're directly responsible for much more hypertension and cardiovascular disease, for much of that, and dramatically weakening our immune system. So they make us susceptible to even more diseases. And so stress and anxiety are highly under expressed as culprits for a great deal of illness. So then we ask, well, what kind of thinking contributes to stress and anxiety? I'm glad you asked. And those are the cognitive distortions, as you suggest. So there's about a dozen of those. So, for example, a couple of their major ones, like fortune telling and catastrophizing, assuming we know what the future will be. I'll be ill in the future. I won't get well. There won't be any ways of fulfilling my goals in life because I'm not feeling well, because it might get worse, or that's fortune telling. And catastrophizing, the highly negative versions of the future, usually go hand in hand. So those, just even those two cognitive distortions cause a great deal of our suffering, a great deal of our stress and anxiety. I'll never get better. This will ruin my life. It's like, how do we know? We're not, yes, we're grappling with something challenging, but how do we know what next week, next month, next year, 5 years will be like? If someone were to ask us 10 years ago, hey, what do you think the 2020s will be like? You know, who would have predicted COVID? Or in beginning of COVID, what do you think this is going to be like? Who would have predicted some of the vaccines that came from that only 2, 3 years later? So uh, millions of lives were in jeopardy. And then the vaccine comes out and changes completely around. And so we just don't know. Um, and so we still want to be practical with the challenges we have in front of us, but we want to develop some humility about recognizing that our predictions of the future are limited, and that if anything, given the rate at which science is moving forward, and AI and genetic engineering and so on, and which leads to dramatic increase in vaccines, if anything, optimism is the more realistic scenario, not pessimism, because again of the rate things are moving forward so quickly. So we have this host of cognitive distortions, um, and and they are the culprits. So all or nothing fortune telling, all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, and so on. We can get to some of those. And like during COVID, if the government, what it really surprised me is that no one in the Department of Health got up and said, "Hey, here's a way of reducing your stress," because stress is a major factor that makes your immune system susceptible to different things. So take a few deep breaths, decatastrophize some of your thinking, and so on. If they had done that, they probably would have saved thousands of lives, if not millions. So, and not a, I didn't see a single news outreach or anything like that. It was all about whether vaccines are effective or not. And but we have a lot more power than we give ourselves credit for. So every time we sit here and take 2 or 3 belly breaths, so diaphragmatic breathing, we're activating a parasympathetic nervous system. We're relaxing ourselves. We're communicating to our mind that we're not in fight flight. So less cortisol and things is pumping through our system. That doesn't hinder our immune system. Our immune system is a little stronger because of that. And now it's able to fight things more in ways that we can't even understand yet. And so that's a lot of power we have to shift our thinking, take some deep breaths, do mindful meditation practices. We'll talk about mindfulness later. And so again, it comes back to this empowerment and choice. Once we accept the power and the responsibility of that power, now we have choices and freedom to exercise it in these ways.
Beautifully said, Shani. I love that. It always comes back, and it's not something that you face once. It's every day, in every hour of every day, there's almost an opportunity to practice this, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
this is, and to keep coming back to, when something comes up, and I'm thinking of, let's use the example of women are affected by autoimmunity, like 80% of the time it's a female thing. So I'm going to use the example of a woman. Let's say she's in her 50s. She's dealing with, she's got kids that are growing up. She's got aging parents. She's got autoimmune disorders, and life is crazy. And she starts feeling new symptoms. She's starting to feel, some new symptom has come up. And so starts to feel that symptom anxiety. This is a very common picture. So I wonder if you can just speak to that a little bit about how this person might take an opportunity, view this as an opportunity to respond in a more skillful, a wiser way that would help to lower her stress.
Yeah, I think, well, one of the things to do is to normalize it. Um, it sounds a little odd to normalize something we call disease, but the fact that we call it disease is a little arbitrary. We're just using a word.
Hmm.
What it is just part of life, and everything is part of life, right? So one of the things you and I talked about, all or nothing, in terms of, do I have a disease? Do I not have a disease? Am I healthy or am I sick? Nobody is healthy or sick. Everyone is experiencing a lot of things, and we all know where life goes. You know, entropy wins at the end. We're all trying to keep entropy at bay for hopefully the better part of a century. And so we have as many years on this planet as we can get. But, you know, entropy is constantly, and those of you um, who haven't been to a physics class since high school, entropy, things go from order to disorder. And so life is a highly ordered mechanism, and and entropy is constantly fighting to degrade that. Things go from order to disorder naturally in every part of life, every part of the universe. And it's part of physics. And so we're constantly eating, resting, healing, trying to keep life together in an organized way, as healed as possible, as organized as possible, while this push and pull with nature is happening. And before this transformation happens, where we go from one state of life to another state of life, and who knows what that is. But so we're constantly, so the reason I'm mentioning this, and it sounds a little esoteric as I'm talking about it, but it's to shift from this kind of, am I healthy or am I sick? Am I this or am I that? It's even the me, if you talk about Buddhist models, we can go really esoteric later on and talk about whether the me is even an illusion. But just on a more practical level, nobody is completely well. There's no such thing. All life, all species, all ants, dogs, raccoons, bears, people are constantly pushing back entropy at all times, at all situations. So everyone has genetic predispositions for hundreds of ailments, maybe thousands. We're all doing our best to put them at bay as many years, decades as we can. And as far as I can tell, for all of us, it's not a matter of when our cells or organs, our bodies give out. It's not if, it's just when. And we're trying to live as many years as possible, as healthy as possible. And science is constantly coming up with ways of doing it better, way more effective in our everyday lives, in our thinking, in our psychology, things. And we're constantly being empowered more as we do that. The information is available now to almost everyone, and the practices are as well. So what we're left with is the empowerment of saying, okay, I get that. I can do now a lot about that. I don't have to label myself as anything. So whatever I'm grappling with, how can I optimize my life? And one of the answers to that is living with more wisdom and the skill sets associated with that, and facilitating our development towards that more and more can slow down this process of um, illness and degeneration and so on, and dramatically increase the process of wellness and not more optimal health and thinking and feeling, no matter what our condition.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I frequently speak about symptoms just as being messengers from our bodies, letting us know that something is out of balance. And so, what an invitation to, instead of fighting it or resisting it or getting angry about it, or any of the number of responses that one might have, including grief. And these are all real and natural responses, but there's also an opportunity to inquire, what is this trying to teach me? What can I learn from this? What is the opportunity now? Maybe an exploration to go a little bit deeper. So I think that's part of the response, is stepping back a little bit, giving yourself a little bit more space. And maybe this is where you can introduce mindfulness, because uh, people may or may not know what mindfulness means. I think it's a charged word, kind of like meditation gets just maybe not a bad rap, but people have an impression that it's something that other people do, monks go do. But I think that you could really help us to understand, how can we become more mindful in our everyday lives and view these things that come up as opportunities to practice.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, mindfulness is very pivotal. There are many skill sets. It's not all about mindfulness as we're talking. It's about being realistic and cognitive distortions, and as we will talk more about gratitude and all sorts of other practices. So wisdom is a much more broad concept, but mindfulness is one of the foundational skill sets that can be practiced like any of the others. And you're noticing I'm intentionally calling all these things skills. So sometimes we look at someone and say, "Oh, that person is just so kind." Yeah, uh, but they practice being kind,
Mm.
maybe even from childhood. So if you practice something 10,000 times, if somebody was kind 10,000 times from the age of 2 to the age of 22, you're going to look at that 22-year-old and go, "Wow, they're kind." Yeah, they've been practicing kindness 20,000 times. It's true of any skill. So calling emotional intelligence, mindfulness, empathy, compassion, gratitude skills immediately evokes the notion that they're practicable. And so let's talk about mindfulness, and let's bring that to other concepts too. The practice of mindfulness, let's define mindfulness. Most models of mindfulness have two pieces. One is bringing our attention to the present and keeping it present as long as possible. And when the attention wanders to the future or the past, bringing it back to the present. And our ability to observe rather than react. It's like, "Oh, I feel stressed. Oh, I feel like I'm not good enough. Oh, I feel like I'm too sick to do anything." That's an interesting thought. I now observe that thought and realizing it's just a thought. There's nothing about that thought that's absolute truth. It's just a thought. It's like I'm going to have a sandwich later, or that's a blue ball, or that's a tree. They're all just thoughts. The Bay Area's got this wonderful bumper sticker of, the famous line, "Don't believe everything you read." And we've got our bumper sticker here, "Don't believe everything you think." They're just thoughts. Some thoughts are more true than others, some are less true than others. Many of them have cognitive distortions. That will never happen. All or nothing, catastrophizing, fortune telling. So, our ability to bring our attention to the present, our ability to observe our body, our thoughts, and observe them rather than react. And those two are key practices. And a lot of mindful meditation practices have those two components. I'm sitting quietly, I'm closing my eyes, I'm visualizing something, and like the ocean, I focus on something like the water in the ocean, and I let all thoughts come and go. Doing that practice That's called focused mindful meditation. It's a very common form of meditation practice. What that does is it's every time we do that and we let a thought come and go, it makes us less attached to that thought. And if we do that again and again and again, the brain and the mind are starting to get the picture here. Okay, I don't have to be as attached to that thought as I thought I needed to be. Let's let that go. And initially, it's very hard. Initially, we don't let the thought go. We let it go for 2 seconds, it comes right back. We let it go for 5 seconds, comes right back. Sometimes it's common to be very frustrated when you first meditate that's happening. It's like, I can't believe I'm not good at this. Well, remember, we talked about this as a skill. So, of course, we're not good at this. We're just starting out. It's like playing tennis. Imagine the first few weeks of playing tennis. It's like, I can't believe I'm not playing like Roger Federer, or I'm not ready for the US Open. It's like, yeah, we just started. It's a skill that builds up over months and years. But even within weeks and months, you see the difference, big difference in skill set. And suddenly, instead of only 2 or 3 seconds, we can let go of a thought for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. And if for some reason it's hard to let some thoughts go from a mindfulness point of view, then there's maybe something about that thought that's particularly gnawing at us and particularly distorted. And so then we can look to the cognitive distortion. Am I catastrophizing? Am I telling? So, for example, if I have the thought, what am I having for lunch today? Sure, I'm having a sandwich. Let's let that thought come and go. No problem. But if my thought is, I wonder if I'll be well enough to do something next year, that's a much deeper thought than what sandwich I'm having this afternoon. So it's all mindfulness is not created equal here. That's much harder to let that second thought go. So what we want to do is then run that thought through the cognitive behavioral techniques, like doing a thought record and cognitive distortions. And there's books like Feeling Good by David Burns and Mind Over Mood that are very good in creating an expertise in doing this process I'm describing right now. And so I'm not getting any royalties from these books. So just
No,
pure,
they're wonderful books. I'll
wonderful.
put them in the show notes.
Yeah, sounds good. And so as you become better and better at doing this, at first it takes maybe 10, 20 minutes to do a thought record where you go through the thoughts, the cognitive distortions, you generate a replacement thought that's realistic based on evidence. And now you practice that replacement thought, and then that becomes your automatic thought. It's like, yeah, I'm a little bit not feeling well here, but I have no idea what I'll be able to do next year. And I'm going to stay optimistic that maybe things can improve just like they've improved a little bit in the past, and new science comes out all the time, so I can stay optimistic. That becomes the replacement thought. And once we start doing that, we're noticing that our emotions start changing along with it. So now we take the bite out of this excruciating thought that, oh, I'm never going to do anything again. Like, that's not really true. So why keep it in our heads? So we run it through this process and create a more true, again, this is not to feel good. This is to be more realistic. Why hold thoughts in our head that are less realistic, especially when they're highly troubling and hold us back? So if we can create more realistic thoughts, now we find this new thought. It's like, yeah, I don't feel so good and I don't quite know what will happen, but there's good reason to think that if I do a lot of practices, I'll be able to do more. Now let me let that thought come and go. And that's much more realistic to let that happen. So that becomes the mindfulness practice around healing and so on. And the last bit that we probably want to note is that if mindfulness brings our attention to the present, it has a very nice feature because stress and anxiety love the future. They're mostly based in the future. Right now, as we're talking, everything is fine. But an hour from now, a day, a week, a month, a year, who knows, right? So that's where stress and anxiety take a foothold. And so if we bring our attention to the present most often, it's not that we can sometimes plan for the future. We can spend 1 or 2% of our time planning for the future, but let's spend 98% of our time present. It's not just with illnesses, it's with everything. When people go on vacation, right? They're so busy taking pictures, they don't have the experience itself. People are taking pictures of a vacation they never had because they were too busy taking pictures, right? They're too busy documenting an experience they're not having because they're distracted taking pictures. And doesn't mean to take no pictures, but I don't think we need 10,000 pictures. I think 50 to 100 pictures over a week is plenty to remind us of what we did over that vacation.
That
So
is so funny. I hadn't thought of that, Shani. They're thinking about the pictures to show other people in the future.
Yeah, where they were physically. But if you're standing in front of the Grand Canyon and 90% of your time is documenting the experience by taking pictures, now you spent only 10% experiencing the Grand Canyon rather than 90% of the time experiencing the Grand Canyon and maybe 2 or 3% of the time taking pictures and to remind you later of the Grand Canyon. And so it's the same thing here. So the villains here are the kinds of processes that force our mind into the future,
Yeah.
especially when the future hasn't been set yet. It's an unknown, and our mind pretends and lies to us like it is known, and then we get stressed and depressed because of that. So when we remind ourselves, look, I don't know what the future is, and lots of science is coming all the time. I know some of my challenges right now, and I know some skills and practices that I'm empowered to practice and that will help me now. And let's stay somewhat optimistic about what could be in the future. And I'll keep adapting to whatever comes in the future and keep using the best practices in science as they come. And now
You
we
know,
can go to our,
Shawnee, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Please
no,
finish your thought.
no, and then just to let all those thoughts come and go and just be present.
Yeah. I was so excited, which is why I jumped in, because it occurred to me that everything that you do to help us shift our perspective is about finding freedom, freedom from suffering and making the suffering piece optional. You know, it's kind of like stuff happens, but all of our thinking about that adds this second layer of stress that is really and truly optional. And
Yeah,
this is not to minimize what people might be feeling, which could be, terrible what people are going through.
yeah, absolutely. And it's worth normalizing all that too. Of course, we have stress and anxiety and anger as the default setting. Evolution saw to that. Evolutionary, Evolutionarily speaking, it's understandable that fear and anxiety are the easiest things to feel because, and not wellness or caring. Or if, a million years ago, if we're in front of a tiger and, our ancestor is saying, oh, nice kitty, and the tiger is roaring and hungry, that's the last interaction we're having because we're lunch that day, right? The tiger's lunch. So our ancestors, some of them were lunch and some of them felt fear and hightailed it out of there. Those were the survivors. Those are and they gave their progeny is us. So they kept their anxiety and anger as a default setting. But just because that's the default setting doesn't mean we're stuck with it. We have choices of practicing alternative setting and being mindful and being grateful, even being at any point in time. The more practice we have, the more that replaces the default setting that evolution gave us as a default for survival. We can do a lot more than survive, we can thrive. But up until recent history, that wasn't an issue. Survival was the only issue. Now we're noticing through psychological and integrative medicine that we can do a lot more than just survive. We can thrive under any circumstance.
Perfectly said. So good, Shawnee. And you mentioned the word gratitude. So I'd love for you to bring that into the conversation because I find the people that I work with who have a gratitude practice, who are grateful for the smallest things, are the ones that end up finding more to be grateful for. It's almost like a magnet of positive psychology when we feel that gratitude, even in the midst of the mess, right? Not waiting for someday I'll be happy and then I'll be grateful for it. But right now, in the midst of whatever you may be going through, can you feel grateful for something, the sunset, something small, something that someone did for you today, a phone call you might have received?
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost counterintuitive that again, going back to kind of a default setting is focus on your problems. And that's a good survival tool generally. If you're in survival mode, put out the fires first, right? There's a reason that's a very common metaphor, put out the fires. Because if your house is burning, you're not going to be sitting there talking about wallpaper patterns. That's a luxury you don't have while the house is burning. So it makes sense that we focus on the negatives, but there are a whole lot more positives than negatives in life. But the fact that we're sitting here talking and the fact that our good friends here are listening to this if you're sitting and listening to this, just like we are sitting here talking about this, a lot had to go right in life for that to happen. In fact, almost everything had to go right. 99.9% of life, we had to not have car accidents, not to succumb to COVID 5 years ago, not have all sorts of ailments, thousands of ailments that we could have had that were life threatening that we don't have. Yes, we have some life ailments that we're grappling with, but we don't have 1,000 others. And that's a really critical piece. And so there's a reason why gratitude, along with some of these other practices we're talking about, have become universal in most spiritual and religious traditions. Some wise people a long time ago saw the benefit of gratitude as a practice, and now it became part of psychological science. So now we have the evidence, in addition to spiritual traditions, that it's an incredibly powerful practice. And why is that? It's because we get used to the good, again, for survival reasons. We're addressed to fires to put out. But when things are going right, and 99% of things are going right, like being able to breathe and see and living in a relatively free society, it's a lot of things to be grateful for. And even in political conflicts and so on, no matter what side you're on, when you don't acknowledge that a lot of things are going right, it's easy to get highly reactive to the things that are not going well. And so this becomes a practice. So when I talk to clients and my students and so on, my first question is, first 10 minutes of all discussions, tell me what's going well in your life. Then we'll get to the challenges. And the reason I do that is because it's so easy to just go right into the what things we call problems. And notice I'm carefully stating that, not problems, things we're calling problems, because we have the freedom to frame those in other ways, right? If there's traffic, we can call traffic a problem, or we can note that the reason probably there is traffic is there's an accident up the road. Somebody is having a really bad day, the person in the car of the accident. And when I hear sirens, I pause no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing. I pause for about 30 seconds and think, somebody's having a bad day, and then pause for some empathy, compassion for them. And then also pause for some gratitude for the fact that we were lucky enough not to be in that ambulance or be the focus of that fire truck. So it's an increased awareness that we usually take for granted and usually don't have because we're so used to and habituated to everyday life. How many of us woke up this morning, got up and went, oh man, my legs work today? That is amazing, right? Because our legs have been working, for most people, legs have been working every day for our whole lives. Or taking a breath. Now, if some of us had a flu, which I had last week, and suddenly, you're all stuffed up, you cannot even breathe out of your nose, and it's a miserable experience. And suddenly your nose clears up and you can breathe again. Man, that first day or two is awesome, right? Like, I can breathe again. What happened there? Well, something basic that we got used to was taken away from us and then brought back. In other words, it was a reminder, a very visceral reminder over a few days or a week of something that's very valuable here that we took for granted for months or years, and now for a few days are not. And then a few days later, what happens? We take it for granted again. And we get used to it again, and now it's like, yeah, I can breathe. So what? What's life done for me lately? The point here is that no matter what state we're in, if we have a flu, we can still see. And if we're blind, we can listen to music. If we're blind and deaf, we can eat ice cream, and that's pretty yummy. Uh, don't even get me started on chocolate and tiramisu. That's my current practice to deal with. But yeah, it's again, it's empowerment that no matter what state we're in, no matter what our challenges are, we can practice this additional skill of being grateful and seeing the good things in life in a new way and on a daily basis. That's a critical piece too.
I want to weave in the elements of humility and self-compassion as the final parts of the content that I want to get to today, Shani. I could talk with you for hours. So I really love what you're sharing about gratitude, about really finding freedom from all these cognitive distortions. But there's a way of going about how we live. And I think the added elements of humility and self-compassion are really soothing. And I would love to hear your perspective on how we can practice more.
Yeah. So there's, yeah, those kinds of things, and maybe a couple of other things we can talk about afterwards, optimism as well as a piece,
Mm,
as a kind of a takeaway. But yeah, it's self-compassion is related to a few things. One is our self-esteem. I mean, there are a lot of people who would say, quote, I don't deserve that, or I don't deserve to be happy, or I don't deserve to be well.
mm,
So it's not just complaining that I'm not well, I don't deserve to be well. That is something that needs attention.
mm,
If we're looking at, you know, and if you start looking at why is it that we're not giving ourselves self-compassion, why are we not giving us the same courtesy we would give somebody else? If your
mhm,
friend told you I don't deserve to be well, how would that feel?
mm.
It's like, what do you mean you don't deserve? Of course you're a good. Of course you deserve to be well. You're a good person, even if you weren't a good person, you deserve to be well. Everybody deserves to be well. And so but there are likely cognitive distortions there. Like one of the cognitive distortions, a common one, is the shoulds. As I mentioned to you, Palmer, that I had a mentor once who said, "Shani, stop shooting all over yourself. Should do this, I should do that, I shouldn't, should, what the world will be like." And I should have known better. I should have done better. That's a common one.
Mm.
And life is made up of a bunch of learning curves. No one is born omniscient. Knowing better takes skills. Those skills can be learned. That learning takes time. So when we didn't know how to do something, by definition, we shouldn't have known that. How do we know? Because we didn't. It's that straightforward. It's that simple. Now we know, sure, hindsight. When Let's take this to the extreme. Imagine saying, I can't believe when I was 1 year old, I kept wetting my diapers. It's like, what was I thinking? It's like, well, we were one, and we didn't quite have the skill sets to an impulse control to hold off and go to the bathroom. And we did when we were 3 or 4 years old, potty trained, and then we did that and hopefully kept most of that throughout our life. And so the absurdity of saying that, right? It's I should have known better when I was 1 year old, gives you a sense that that applies to every stage of learning, every stage of development. So even if you're 30 or 40 or 50, like, oh, I can't believe I only know this now at 50. I should have known that at 30 or 20. Like, no, you shouldn't have. How do we know that? Because you didn't.
Because you didn't.
The sum total of all our genetic predispositions and all the environments we were in, and the learning and the parenting and the friendships and the education or not education or non-parenting or whatever took place, both genetic predispositions and environment interacting over the course of decades, has led to this point. And at this point, this is the best I can do, the best I know. Yeah, but I did know, I just didn't do it. Well, that's a motivational piece and a behavioral piece that we didn't know by definition. How do we know? Because we didn't do it. And so something was missing. I may have known that cognitively, but I didn't know it physiologically or behaviorally, or I didn't, or scheduling wise. Something was not there, or it would have been done by definition. So the point is that all these learning curves, including self compassion, it's a skill that we have to learn. And sometimes there are these challenges like self esteem and things that need to be addressed. That's a process that can be done with most therapists, counselors, that can be addressed within a few months. We can really do a deep dive into one's sense of self and where that came from and history of their life, and but very quickly focusing on the present and where we can have their self-esteem go and so on, and create a healthier self in terms of sense of self. And once we have a healthier sense of self, it's like, yeah, I've had challenges. Yeah, I have challenges right now, but I could be moving in a very positive direction with more mindfulness, more emotional intelligence, more skill sets. And isn't that all I have control over? The past is gone. All I have is now, and all I have is decisions of how I want to move forward. And it turns out there's a lot of psychological and integrative medicine science that can now guide me in moving forward in very positive ways. Let me try to embrace some of those, knowing it'll be hit and miss, knowing there's going to be learning curves. I'm not going to be good at this tomorrow overnight, but over time, if I practice, I'll get better and better at it.
So you've mentioned the word positivity or positive psychology and humility. And so in any direction you want to go with that, um, how would you and I love the way that you're framing everything is a skill that we can learn. This is not something that we're born with. It's something that we can practice, but it starts with a decision. I want to approach life from a wiser perspective. And so,
That's
how can we be more optimistic? How can we practice that humility?
So the humility piece first is really central to that. It's, of course, I'm not perfect. Of course, I've got challenges. Of course, I'm not that good at catching all my cognitive distortions. But if I catch two or three today, I'll be little better at it tomorrow. And if I catch tomorrow another couple, I'll be better at it next week. And if I keep doing this, I'll get pretty good at it within a month or two. And if I do it for several months, I'll be really good at it. That is realistic for most people, almost all people. And so, but the humility piece is this acknowledgement that, yeah, I'm not omniscient. I'm not omnipotent. I'm human. I've got, like many other animals, mammals. I've got learning curves. I've got things to develop, and I've got the potential to do that. Let me actualize some of that potential. So the humility is, notice how we change from the age of 5 and 10 and 15, the things we learned. If you ask yourself, you know, you can even pause this video now and think about 5 things you learned since you were 5 and 10 and 15 years old. What do you know now that you didn't know then? And you notice every 5 years or so, you learn a lot through your early years, from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25. And so, given that pattern, there's every reason to think, why not keep going? What are the next things we learn in 5 years and 10 years? A lot of times the learning curve slows down. But what if we kept it going and practiced all these things? Imagine if in 5 or 10 years from now, you learned as much as you did from the age of 5 to 20. It would be a radically different way of looking at the world and operating in the world. A 5-year-old operates very differently than a 20-year-old. Your current self could be the 5-year-old version in a year or 2 years or 5 years. And it usually with active practice takes a lot less time. It speeds it up. So in 5 years, you can learn the equivalent of what you learned in 15 years of 5 to 20 or 25 years old. And that's part of the optimism that exists here, the humility that, yeah, I don't know everything right now. There's a lot to learn. Here's the psychological science around all these things from 50 years of research, thousands of studies. We now know the skill sets and the practices that are highly effective because millions of people across thousands of studies were asked to do this, and we recorded what the outcomes were. That's called scientific journals. And so it's no longer subtle. If you meditate even 5 minutes a day, if you do that every day for a few weeks, you feel the difference. A few months, it's transformational. Emotional intelligence, if you keep looking at the emotions you have and look at the thoughts associated with them, every time you're stressed, every time you're anxious, it's like, hey, what did I expect from that? I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed, but was my expectation realistic? Or is there some cognitive distortions there? And if there are, let me look at those and make my expectation more realistic. And by realistic, I don't mean kind of doom and gloom. I mean, realistic, it's like, okay, this is where it's at now, but let's also bring in some optimism and practice that too. Realistic optimism, not Pollyannish optimism. And optimism based in data, in science, in realistic things that millions of others have gone through. Life on Earth has evolved over billions of years. During that time, it created thousands of mechanisms that for healing. Our bodies, whatever your model of the world or our origins, it's pretty clear that our bodies over a long period of time have massive amounts of mechanisms for healing, many more than we thought. And every likelihood that it's over a very long time span. And so all of life on this planet. And so, those are the ones and those are just the ones we know about. We're discovering hundreds more every year. Not to mention genetic engineering constantly is increasing at an exponential rate during the pandemic. What used to take decades to come up with vaccine was done in 2 years during the pandemic. That's how fast this thing is moving. So, we could be optimizing quality of life as a main focus rather than just making challenges the main focus. You're not an MS patient. You're Susan, you're Joe, you're Mary. You're the sum of all your passions, your thoughts, your skills, wisdom, behaviors, goals, inspirations, achievements, joy, daily activities, daily choices. That's who we are. And so to narrow it down and overly focus and giving way too much weight to one of the challenges of life is not just disturbing and causes a lot of grief. It's unrealistic. So to be more realistic and focus on a very much broader picture of who we are and our choices and the freedom we have is a much bigger, more realistic picture to focus on. And whatever our challenges, if we're deaf and you can't hear music, you focus on the visual arts. So, just to kind of sum up all of this, there's a famous parable of there's a battle of two wolves, inside of us. And some of you have heard this, you know, they usually talk about it as one of them is angry, jealous, greedy, uh, frustrated, hurtful. The other is, joy, peace, mindful, wisdom. And so which wolf wins? The one we feed. It's a Native American proverb. And so we're talking about giving a lot more oxygen and attention to these practices rather than anger, stress, anxiety, cognitive distortion, doom and gloom, what I can't do. Let's focus on what we can. We're not ignoring what we can't. We're not pretending that's not there. We're just not giving it a lot of attention. It's not that we're not taking any pictures during our vacation. We're just taking 5% pictures, 95% we're focusing on present, on what we can do, on learning skills. And so it's not that we don't have challenges, including health challenges. You do, I do, everybody does. It's what we do with those that makes all the difference. It's look at what Palmer's done with her challenges, creating this whole infrastructure, which is incredibly inspiring. Us being here today is you making a choice of spending time doing this, which is a very positive choice. So as you practice these wisdom skills, think about not only increasing your well-being, which makes sense, which is already the more ambitious version than typical medicine, but also one last skill I'll talk about: ego transcendence and wisdom. What can you also do to help others? Focusing on ourselves is not that healthy either. Certainly, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. That's what they tell us on the plane, and it's good advice. Because if we pass out, we can't help anyone. But as you start helping yourself, bring in parallel to that how you can be helpful to others too. And the fact that this series exists, that's Palmer's answer to this. I teach at the university. A lot of these concepts, I created courses of positive psychology and well-being to students that are 18, 20, 22, to try to catch them early in life so they can practice some of these things. And don't get discouraged as you're doing this and trying to help yourself and be healthier and be of service to others. Notice that when you feel discouraged, that, this is not really helping that much. Notice that 3 dimensions, the frequency, intensity, and duration of things like stress, anxiety, anger are changing. Not all of them necessarily will change. Sometimes the frequency doesn't change. It's still high frequency, but the intensity went down 20% from a 70 to a 50. Sometimes the intensity is still high, but the frequency went down from every day to twice a week. Notice the changes because that's reinforcing the practice. Sometimes we get some benefits. Say, yeah, the frequency went down. We don't even acknowledge it. Yeah, when I get pissed off, it's still incredibly intense. And when I get stressed or depressed, I can't believe I'm still getting stressed or depressed. It's like, well, it's a learning curve. Of course, it's going to go down slowly over time. With these practices, it'll go down even faster, but it's still not a day or a week. It's months or even a couple of years of these practices. But the alternative is instead of seeing these improvements, the stuff gets worse. Practicing stress and anxiety and ill health and all these things that don't help. It goes in the other direction. So yes, so be patient with yourself. Notice the frequency and intensity or duration are going down even slightly. Give yourself credit for even 5 or 10% reductions on any of those 3 dimensions. And just remember that it takes a lot of practice, and probably worth finishing with the joke of the New York tourist who's asking directions from a New York native. How do I get to Carnegie Hall? And of course, a native New Yorker responds, practice, practice, practice.
Shani, that was a masterclass in wise living. Thank you. Thank you. I know that people are going to watch this or listen to this again and again because there's so much richness here. And this is not about instant gratification in the sense of like instant healing. This is a lifetime's worth of practice. It's an opportunity to live from this place with more freedom.
Yes, and thank you for that. It's almost like flipping a switch. It's like instead of living a reactive life of just getting by and white knuckling it, I'm going to choose to live a developmentally oriented life where everything is an opportunity to practice. Every time I'm in traffic, every argument I have with anyone, every time I feel symptoms in myself, they're all opportunities to practice. And as you know, we've talked about the last 2 years of my life, for example, have been particularly challenging. My mother passing away and my daughter having hardships and half a dozen other things that are in the top 10 list of stressors. Yeah. All
Yeah.
Psych 1 textbooks have a top 100 stressors. In the last 2 years, I've experienced 6 or 7 of the top 10, all back to back and sometimes overlapping. Never once did I think, woe is me, or I shouldn't be experiencing this, or I didn't like it. I wouldn't say, oh, I'm so glad I'm experiencing this. No, I'd vote not to experience it. But the opportunity it presents is to facilitate wisdom quickly, more quickly than it would come otherwise. By
Yeah.
practicing, saying, okay, if I'm paying the price of this kind of suffering, I might as well gain wisdom out of this. Why pay the price and not get the benefit of an experience, right? So don't get me wrong. I love wisdom. My whole life revolves around 30 years of the science and psychology and practice of wisdom. But I don't want wisdom so bad that I would say, oh, I'm so happy for these hardships. Bring them on more. Give me more. I want more wisdom. No, no, thank you. Plenty of wisdom.
Yeah.
I'm okay cruising for a few months on the wisdom I
Yeah.
already have. But if life is going to throw it at me and I don't have a choice sometimes about that, then okay. If this is what life is throwing at me, I'm going to make the most of it and realize, it's very shocking that my mother passed away unexpectedly, but I can choose to both mourn the loss and I can choose to also celebrate her life mostly and put that in the front and mourn as well. I'm not going to pretend it's not sad, very sad, but I'm not going to pretend that a great deal of positive things haven't been there either. And that gives us balance in life and makes us more realistic. And that realism brings in some positive emotions and hope and optimism and other things. And so it's in the spirit of being more realistic that wisdom brings in all these practices. And that's what I wish for all of you.
I'm so grateful. And here you are sharing these stories and your own experiences, and we all benefit, and the ripple effect continues. And Shani, this has been such a rich conversation, and I can't wait for more conversations. I'm so grateful to have known you for more than 20 years now. And let's make it sometime again soon. Let's have another conversation. I really look forward to it. This has been a treasure trove of information and heart. Thank you.
Of course, you're very welcome, and I'm very grateful and appreciative of what you're doing with this series. And a lot of people in the world are going to gain a lot from that. And I give you a lot of credit for that, for
Yeah.
taking all of your challenges in life and turning it into something spectacular. So good
Well,
job.
I'm excited. Thank you for that. For people to find you at wisdomtherapy.com is the URL. And I will put that information in the show notes as well, so that if people want to reach out to you, they can do so. And until the next time, my friend, thank you so much. Be well, Shani.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with your friends and family, and if you feel inspired, please leave a quick review so other people can find it too. Now, if you want to beat autoimmune and thrive, make sure you sign up for my free video training at freeautoimmunetraining.com. That's freeautoimmunetraining.com, and watch the first video right away. Take good care. Bye for now.